So the whole point of these videos is to give you a little insight into why they were made or how they were made maybe, but not to get bogged down in anything too technical or too obvious, I think is the phrase I'm looking for. Because I think what sets our wines apart is the story behind them and the reason that we have released them rather than the technical aspects that have gone into making them. Certainly not particularly interested in diving down into pHs or soil structure or anything like that. Like the wine is so much more evocative than just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about moment and capturing a sense of space and all of those ethereal things that make people think that people who love wine are utter wankers. But there's a truth in there somewhere. There's something in between the lines of being a nerd, cork dork, whatever it may be, and someone who just wants to have a nice glass of wine. Right? There's a gap in between the two, and that's where I think our wines sit perfectly. They're wines that have all of the caveats that you want to throw at them, but they come from a place of heart, a place of soul, and I don't think that is encapsulated by any of our wines more so than the Pasotismo Tinto. And it's nice that I'm talking to you about this from the balcony of my friend Adrienne, who puts me up every year, well, more than every year. Every time I come to Spain, I'm allowed to stay here and sit drinking gin and tonics on this balcony and get space with the people that set this wine, the parent winery, up and set things in motion for us 10 years ago. And they're the spirit of everything that we've achieved over the last 10 years. That idea of collaboration, that heartbeat of sharing skills, talents, and a common goal. And that was not necessarily true when we first started. And that's not to disparage the early years. That's not to talk down on the first vintages of our first wines. But it was very much a subsistence life to get going. It was very much us making wines that we loved, wines that we cared about, but wines that were built to get the wheels in motion. They were broad stroke, international variety, come home, drink wine, take the top off, not worry about wines. There was no grand plan for them other than being really good drinkers. And the plan then evolved as we developed those early years. As we went from vintage 1, 2, 3, 4, we started figuring out that we were more than just what's the phrase I'm looking for? We were more than just making wines. We were more than commodity winemakers. That's the right expression. We were looking to do something with a bit more integrity and a bit more meaning. You know, this phrase I keep coming back to of making wines that matter. That wasn't part of the conversation when we first got going, but it became part of the conversation. And all of the successes we've had with indigenous varieties, unusual styles, different winemaking techniques, different facilities in the winery, different styles, everything that you can possibly imagine, all of it comes off the back of the first iteration of Pasotismo Tinto. And the reason that it's so important is it's the first truly collaborative wine that we made. Now, when we first got going in Batan, we were very much, I say we, it was very much me in my corner trying not to upset the apple cart, trying not to get in the way, trying to let the wines come through the winery rather than shape them myself. And that was great to get going. But then the spirit of Spain, the spirit, the sort of personality that I am, the sort of personality the guys here in Spain are, it was never just come and make your wines and then leave. It was very much come and make your wines and then we'll have a beer afterwards. And then the beer turned into 2 beers and then it turned into starting cooking dinner for each other. And then it started gin and tonics and all sorts of, all of the all of the extra stuff, all of the stuff outside of the winemaking started to ripple and then become a tidal wave of enthusiasm when we started becoming more than just collaborative. That's not what I'm trying to say. We became more than colleagues. That's the right way of explaining it. We moved from being colleagues to becoming collaborators. We started sharing ideas. We started looking at what the core ingredients we had. We started looking at what we had at our disposal in terms of the cellar. We looked at how we were farming, and we started noticing that we had things in common. We had things that were lining up. We had a palate that was becoming aligned. We had a ethos that was becoming aligned, and it was moving away from traditional Somontano. And there is no traditional Somontano. It was a very young DO. It goes back 2,000 years as a grape growing region, but the style hasn't really broken through to global recognition. And so when we talk about traditional Somontano, we're talking about the last 20 years, really, the years where it became a commercial entity. And those wines were not the thing that we wanted. That was not the world we wanted to inhabit. We wanted to move beyond that and start making things that were very specifically us. And I talk about it a lot in some of the other videos, where to me the perfect wine or the best wines are a balancing act between reflecting the region's personality, the winemaker's personality, and the vintage's personality. And those three things are vitally important to making exciting wines. And we're losing sight of that in the global homogenization of wine, and that's fine. There's some great wines out there that don't necessarily need a winemaker's personality, or don't necessarily reflect a region's specificities, or don't necessarily capture the nuances of a vintage. But I think if you want to get to the next levels and go above those wines, you need to be leaning on those three, and ideally you're leaning on them equally and not hiding from any of them. And so that means there's good years and bad years, but when it's perfect, those three things really translate to the glass that you've got in front of you. And we realized that we were not doing that. We realized that we were meandering along and making wines with compromises, and we wanted to try and find a way of making wines that didn't have any compromises. No compromises in farming, and certainly no compromising in winemaking, and ideally wines that really reflected the vintage. And so we set out with this plan of making the best wine we could within the box we were given. Me and Nico, the winemaker for Batan, we are not the owners, we are not the money men, we are the workforce, right? So we don't get to have the final say on where the money's spent, on where things go. So it was very much, here's our plan, here's our idea for the future. How can we move forwards along that plan? And the bosses were enthusiastic about the idea of making the best wine we could. And our initial goal was to make the best wine in Somontano. And they said, if you can prove to us this is a viable path, then we will back you further down the road. But you've got to do vintage one with a very limited budget, a very limited resources, other than what you've got in the vineyards. And so to really make the most of it in that first year, what we focused on was barrel fermentation, a process that is laborious, time consuming, takes up real estate in the cellar. It's not something that you can do on a massive scale to any great intent, because the amount of time and the space it requires negates any mass-produced barrel-fermented wines. But for us, we're working on such small scales. We're working with small varieties and small plots, very localized, very focused. We knew that this was a way in. It was a cheapish way of us expressing the best of Somontano and finding out what we could get out of the grapes we had before we start looking at what translated to indigenous varieties and regenerative farming and organics and concrete. This is before all of that happened. It was just a case of making the best wine we could with what we had. We added 8 500-litre barrels to our portfolio, our roster of oak, all with the ability to do barrel fermentation. And we said, let's focus on 4 varieties. We focused on Syrah, Garnacha, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Merlot. So all international blockbusters, all mainstays of Somontano, mainstays of global wine production, but the grapes that we had access to and the grapes that we felt confident that we had excellent plots of. And so we made 8 barrels. We made 8 barrel fermented versions, so 2 barrels of each of the 4 grape varieties. And we thought, this is where we can see how good our grapes are at the moment, and if we can set a benchmark of quality now, then hopefully that will open the door for the powers that be behind Batan de Salas saying, well, we trust you, we believe in you, where else can we invest? But that first wine has to be amazing. And we were fishing, right? We were just looking around for it. We weren't sure what the right path was going to be. But those 8 barrels were sensational. We were so excited by them. We initially had no grand end point. It was just to see what those barrels gave us and see how different that wine could be. And we were blown away. The Syrah came through very, very early. That was so rich, so rewarding, so flavorful. And there's a point in the cellar where I feel you move from juice and early fermented wine into being able to see what a wine's going to be in its future, and that's the bit of winemaking where we start doing blends and things like that. And usually that takes months and a long period of time for us to see what we're expecting. Those barrels were almost immediate. Within weeks, days of finishing fermentation, they were like, this is going to be a finished wine. This could be a finished wine in its own right. This has got everything it needs. We're not looking for anything else. We're not looking for any extra character anywhere. Everything is packed into what we've got right in front of us. And so we decided that we would just blend those 8 barrels together. We weren't going to mess around with it. We'd just make a clean, straight blend, bring those 8 barrels together. It makes about 2,000 litres by the end of everything that we've done once we pressed it. And we would hold those in barrel until such time as we felt it was ready to be released as a wine. And it was so exciting. It was such a big leap on from what we'd been doing beforehand. It was such a big step in quality without really changing the wheel, right? We hadn't drastically changed how we farmed. We hadn't really pushed things a huge amount forwards in the cellar. It was a very simple process of focusing on the best plots, the best grapes we had, treating them as well as we possibly could, and putting them in a process that was going to dial everything up to 11 in a really, really good way. And it was that gave us the impetus of thinking, hold on a second, there's something between me and you here, Nico. We've got a collaborative wine here that we've made. This wine exists because of us. This wine exists equally because of the two of us. We need to start elevating this to the program. This needs to become the focus of what we're going to try and achieve. And this was 2018. So we were quite early into the relation, 3-4 years into the relationship together, but it was the point at which we realized that we could do something extraordinary together. We could be winemakers that lifted each other above the standard that we'd been at previously, and perhaps something where we could really become the key principal winemakers for the region. We could really capture something that Somontano hadn't perhaps captured perfectly previously. Now, there's some good wines around in Somontano. I may be over-egging my own custard here a little bit, but I genuinely believe that first Pasotismo, as it became called, was a revelation for me. It changed what I thought was possible, changed what I thought was achievable in terms of quality, structure in the wine, depth of complexity, length of finish, all those key cornerstones of what makes a great wine. We'd done something that we'd not achieved in any of the wines we'd made previously. And we have since gone on to make some extraordinary wines that are very, very different to that first Pasotismo. But it was that point at which I realized we were onto a good thing working together, and we solidified it. So we did what we always do, which is go to the pub, go to the bar. Once we decided that we were going to make this 8-barrel blend together, we're going to make it into one wine, and we thought we need to come up with something here. We need to come up with a name for this wine, for this something that's this collaborative project. And at that point in time, Paso was very, very important to me in terms of the name. So I wanted Paso Primero. We had Paso Vermouth. We wanted to add, I wanted Paso to be the lead in. And Nico came up with this concept of Pasotismo, which harks back to Franco-era dictatorship, where a Pasota was someone who was thumbing their nose at authority, a juvenile, not quite a juvenile delinquent, but someone who was young and not necessarily enthusiastic about following the rules. And this felt like a good fit because this was essentially a Crianza style wine, but it was definitely not Crianza level in terms of the rules. It was something that was halfway on the path to making a traditional Somontano wine, and then took a very distinct turn off to go and be its own wine, and that felt like that idea of a Pasotis sort of fitted what we were trying to achieve. You know, we weren't necessarily the guys who were out spraying graffiti and defying a dictatorship. We were just doing something that was a little bit off the wall for a local DO, but I love the notion of doing something for yourselves and not necessarily following what's gone before. And that's what Pasotismo has become. Now there's Pasotismo Tinto, Pasotismo Blanco. The Pasotismo Collective is essentially all the collaborative wines that me and Nico make together in Batan de Salas. So there's like I said, the Pasotismo Tinto and Blanco. There's the Moristel as well, which is part of the Pasotismo Collective, and the Paso Proximos. They're wines that only exist because of the Pasotismo project. And all of the most exciting wines we make at the moment, all of the wines that are defining us as winemakers, defining our style as a winery, are coming from that collaboration. And the first wine in that collaboration was Pasotismo Tinto, and it's changed. It's fair to say it was very much the four principal grapes to start off with. Now it is a 7 grape blend, and you can see the iconic back label to our Pasotismo Collective is the iconography of every grape and exactly when it was picked, how it was processed, on its journey all the way from grape to glass. And it's still a structured, bigger version of our Paso Primero Tinto. It is our, like, I don't make big wines, we don't make big wines, but this is the biggest wine we make. Sumptuous, unctuous, rich, little bit of tension, little bit of dynamism in there from the 7 grape blend, but we're leaning heavier into the Cabernet, into the Merlot, into the Tempranillo, into the Garnacha. These are richer, rounder fruits, and excuse me, that structure is still coming from more barrel work than we have in our other wines. If our house wine is the Saturday evening in front of the TV wine, this is very much the Sunday roast wine. It's got lovely layers, lovely, it feels warm, right? It feels, and I mean that in a sense that you could, this works really well as the cooler end of a barbecue into the warmer, you know, getting in front of the fire with a stew or whatever it may be. When you're looking for a slightly more structured red, this is the daddy of our portfolio, and it holds a special place in my heart because this was the first collaborative wine that we had, that we both put mine and Nico's names on the back. And I think it's going from strength to strength. The new grapes, the new styles, they're only adding layers to this wine. We haven't lost sight of what it was when we first made it, but we are now making something that has a little bit more lightness of touch and a little bit more finesse, certainly on the nose, certainly on the acidity, certainly on the brighter fruit spectrum. There's more levity in this wine than there was in the early vintages, but still that lovely driving force of a beautiful tannic structure, a beautiful bold fruit profile, and then bags and bags of length. So perfect setting on my balcony, on Adrian's balcony. We've finished harvest. We're just tipping through to the cooler months, and just outside catching the last of the sun. It was peaked at about 23 degrees today, so it's probably about 18 degrees now. Wonderful days tasting behind me. This is exactly the way that I want to finish my day. Beautiful glass of Pasotismo Tinto and a wonderful sunset behind me.